Preston County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
I'm actually driving. I just passed a car on Shower Bath Road that's pulled over. They had smoke rolling out the window. It's a truck. It's a marine truck.
I saw the pickup. It kind of reminded me, of my uncle's truck.
Works at Hillside?
That's what I said. He should be in a tractor trailer. Hey, is my uncle driving today? Didn't show up today. He hadn't heard from him.
On the morning of May 29th, 2019, when first responders arrived at the scene, one of them was left terrified as he realized the abandoned truck engulfed in smoke and flames belonged to his uncle, Philip Buckie Barlow. While investigating Buckie's disappearance, detectives were left shocked when the disturbing secret of an extremely sadistic individual who lived next door started to unfold.
The night that guy came up and said, Rick did a message to Chris. The message said, if anybody comes asking, I was with you guys all night.
Preston County 911.
We're just down here hunting, and we came across a box in a trip.
On the morning of May 29th, 2019, at 7:15 a.m., a woman in Preston County, West Virginia, called 911, describing an odd discovery. Responding to the concerning call, law enforcement was immediately dispatched to the scene on Shower Bath Road. When an officer approached the truck, he noticed that the truck was completely filled up with dense smoke, but to his shock, there was nobody inside. It looked as if the truck had malfunctioned and heated up, leading to an accidental fire. However, taking a closer look in and around the scene, the officer found traces of oil inside the truck. These weren't ordinary circumstances. The truck's odd condition made things look more suspicious. Now, detectives needed to find whose truck it was and what sinister secret could this truck be hiding.
It almost seems as if somebody's probably trying to set this one on fire.
The officer immediately requested fire services. Local fire department arrived at the scene in no time. However, they couldn't have known that they were in for a surprise.
Some sort of oil or lubricant or something.
Don't touch anything or don't disturb any more than you have to.
Local fire chief and one of the first responders, Perry Barlow, noticed something odd about the whole situation. The truck looked familiar to him. When he walked closer and took a glance at the license plate, it seemed as if his soul had left his body. Perry knew who the owner of the truck was.
I saw the pickup. It kind of reminded me, of my uncle's truck.
The registration was run on it.
Well, it comes back to what, Phil Barlow?
It was identified as Philip Barlow's truck.
That's my uncle. I'm thinking, well, why is my uncle's truck here on Shower Bath Road? Why isn't he here? What's going on?
Works at Hillside?
That's what I said. He should be in a tractor trailer.
It turned out that the truck belonged to Perry's 61-year-old uncle named Philip Barlow, affectionately known as Buckie. Perry feared that his uncle could be in danger.
They've dumped oil all over inside of it and tried to set it on fire.
The investigation of this fire, it was pretty cut and dry. When you see motor oil, still residual motor oil laying on the rear seat, it was deliberately attempted to be set on fire. Motor oil is a combustible, but it's not a very fast burning. It never got a good start.
Perry was sure that something wasn't right because it didn't seem likely that Buckie would just set his truck on fire and abandon it in the middle of nowhere.
Kind of an odd place for a fire to start back here, isn't it?
Yeah.
My first thought was that somebody possibly stole the truck.
Perry told the detectives that Buckie should be at work right now. Hoping he'd be there, he called Buckie's workplace, but he got an answer which made him even more worried.
Hey, is my uncle driving today? Didn't show up today. He hadn't heard from him.
Something's wrong because he was very punctual. He was always early.
This was another cause for concern. A 61-year-old man had vanished, leaving behind only his truck in a very wicked situation. The only thing clear at that point was that someone wanted to destroy that truck. Detectives spent hours extensively searching the area where the truck was found, but there were no signs of Buckie anywhere. Once the officers had secured and examined the scene on Shower Bath Road, they headed to Buckie's home, hoping to find any clues that could help them figure out where he was. Buckie lived in Tunnelton, not very far away from where his truck was found. It was only a 10 or 15 minute drive. When detectives arrived at Bucky's address, they didn't find any signs of a disturbance or anything that seemed out of the ordinary in the area. They knocked on the door, but nobody answered. Since the detectives had no cause to break into Bucky's home at that time, they decided to leave. Officers then got in touch with Bucky's friends, who told them about Bucky's girlfriend, Mary Butler. At the time, Mary was living in Indiana, so the detectives could only get in touch with her through a call.
I got a phone call on May 29th that Bucky did show up for work and that they found his truck. I had 50 million things running through my head at that time. Where could he be? What should I do? I knew there was something wrong.
Just the next day, Mary arrived in Preston County to speak with the detectives.
I just wish we could find him alive.
I know, I do too.
This is crazy. I don't want to be without him. He's my world.
Mary told the detectives that the last time she spoke to Bucky was the night before. Bucky would often leave for work between 12:15 and 12:45, so sometime around midnight, Mary and Bucky would have their regular catch-up calls.
I was at my mom's when Bucky called me when he was getting ready for work. I told him that I would call him back, and 15 minutes went by, and I called him, and I didn't get any answer.
Bucky knew that Mary was going to call him a little later, but when Mary called him, there was no answer. And although this struck Mary as quite odd, she didn't think too much about it, thinking he might have been occupied with work. But even with this information, it was hard for the investigators to determine where Bucky went after his truck was set on fire. They'd requested a ping on Bucky's phone, and the results did offer them a few clues.
It was about a half a mile from his house when it stopped transmitting. The direction it traveled was the direction he would have went to go to work. We searched the area for the phone, but we were unsuccessful in finding it.
At that point, Mary gave them permission to search Bucky's residence and check for any clues that could point them in the right direction. Sadly, when they entered the house, it looked untouched. There was nothing that seemed odd or out of place. No signs of a break-in or any kind of disturbance. Officers started to believe that whatever happened to Bucky didn't start in his house. Not finding anything inside the house, officers decided to canvass Bucky's neighborhood and interview people in the area to see if anyone had witnessed any activity that could tell them where Bucky might have gone.
The reason I'm stopping is your neighbor there. I wonder if you happen to know when he left, or did you see him leave, or...
No.
Sadly, none of Bucky's neighbors claimed to have seen or heard anything the night Bucky went missing. The following day, officers called in extra help and resources to escalate their search efforts. In addition to the National Guard, aerial and canine units were also employed to help in the search. The search went on for the next 10 days, but despite all the extra effort, officers returned empty-handed. All hopes of finding Bucky were starting to fade away. But just when detectives thought they were approaching a dead end, they received a chilling phone call from a local hunter, which turned the case even more horrifying.
Preston County 911.
We're just down here hunting, and we came across a body in a creek.
The creek is called Fortney's Mill. From Tunnelton, it's about a 20-minute drive to get there. Very isolated area. Once I got on scene, myself and another officer were able to approach the body. It was moderately decomposed. He did not have a shirt on. His jeans were around his ankles, and he was face down in the water.
Looking at the body's gruesome condition, it was hard to identify. It was only because of the dentures that officers were able to identify the deceased as Philip Buckie Barlow. Officers could tell that Bucky had been through extreme torture and pain, but it was the autopsy report that fully shed light on how sinister Bucky's last moments must have been.
There was a significant injury to his throat area. The jugular was cut, artery was cut, the esophagus was severed, trachea was severed.
Mr. Barlow was, for all intents and purposes, completely decapitated. He was just as brutally injured as you can imagine.
Even so, detectives had no clue that this wasn't even close to the far more sinister things they were about to witness. But for now, it was time to pass the news on to Bucky's loved ones.
Shock. You know, you don't want to believe that it actually happened. Nobody should die that way.
I was hysterical because I didn't want it to be true.
I lost my best friend. I'm not one to show emotional, but it tore me up inside bad.
The family wanted answers. Buckie did not deserve this.
Since in such situations, the victim's close ones are questioned first, the officers called in Mary for an interrogation. After hours of asking her questions, Mary was eventually asked to take a polygraph test. She passed. There was nothing pointing towards Mary's involvement in Buckie's cold murder.
I loved him. We had a good relationship most of the time.
Mary wanted to help the officers as much as she could. She gave them a new name, Craig, Buckie's neighbor, who quickly became a person of interest. Mary remembered something strange Buckie once told her, something she hadn't thought about until now.
I knew there had been an argument and a scuffle with Craig, and I said, stay away from him. Just leave him alone. Don't say nothing.
A while ago, Buckie had been in an altercation with Craig, and from then onwards, the two of them stopped seeing eye to eye.
Craig was living in the back trailer behind Buckie. There always was bickering and fighting back and forth all the time. He would cut through the yard, and Buckie didn't like it. So that would cause arguments. So on Sunday, Buckie decided he wanted to cut the grass. And Craig had left some stuff on the grass. And Buckie had called me and told me about the scuffle. Then that's when he came up missing.
Following the lead given by Mary, officers immediately made their way to Craig's residence to question him.
So what's this about an argument you had with Buckie? Was it true?
We actually, we really did. I ain't gonna lie to you.
He explained the conflict that he had with Buckie was about the property line.
Craig didn't deny any allegations about the argument. He told the detectives that the dispute began when Buckie accused him of leaving garbage bags on his property.
I mean, he could move. And I'd have run to the truck. I grabbed it off out of the back. I chased him around. I wasn't close enough to hit him, but I did swing it at him.
Additionally, Craig said the incident occurred only about a week before Buckie went missing. However, he denied being involved in Buckie's murder in any way.
Craig denied that he had any knowledge or participation in anything that may have happened to Buckie. The night that Buckie disappeared, he said that night he had been working on the radio in the truck. He described the location. It's a back road.
I slept in that Ranger.
You slept in the Ranger all night?
Yeah.
Was anybody with you?
No.
I did question him, why would you sleep in your truck that night when your residence is fairly close? At some point, you're going to wake up in the night. Would you agree with that? You're going to be like, I might as well go home, I'm only 5 minutes away. And he described that that was not out of the norm for him.
I did not leave that spot.
A lot of the things Craig told the detectives weren't making sense at all, making him think he was off the hook. Investigators decided to fact-check his story, which raised some concerning doubts. According to Craig, the truck he slept in belonged to a friend named Chris. After interviewing Craig, officers reached out to Chris and his wife Debbie, and what they revealed would cast even more suspicion on Craig. Investigators were now sure that Craig was hiding a secret, and they needed to figure out what it was.
The night that guy came up missing, Craig sent a message to Chris. The message said, if anybody comes asking, I was with you guys all night.
Have you talked to Craig since this guy went missing? No text messages?
No, nothing about him.
He denied ever seeing a text message from Craig asking him to provide him with an alibi. Chris, during the initial interview, said that he was home pretty much the entire night. He denied any knowledge or any participation in Buckie's disappearance.
You ever look at your phone?
We were able to corroborate, at the very least, Chris's phone was at his residence.
After the interview, officers went through Chris's cell phone records, which helped them determine that Chris and Debbie weren't involved in Buckie's murder. It seemed like Chris and Debbie were being honest with the investigators. Now it was time to bring Craig in for an interrogation and confront him. According to the officers, the best way to do this was by making Craig take a polygraph test.
Well, let me get you all strapped in here.
Craig was asked to polygraph.
Did you in any way participate in the disappearance of Buckie? No.
And he passed that polygraph.
All right, torture's over.
As shocking as it was, Craig passed the test. Investigators then decided to search Craig's cell phone with his permission. However, they couldn't find what they were looking for.
We didn't find anything to suggest that he was a part of the disappearance.
Debbie's allegation that Craig sent a text message requesting an alibi was never corroborated. Officers never located that text message.
The absolutely ridiculous amount of false information and rumors that were spread, it severely impeded getting this case resolved. So once we ruled them out as potential suspects,
Appreciate it.
we were basically back to square one in the investigation.
Since detectives found no leads from Craig, they shifted their focus to the evidence gathered so far. But due to limited information, the case went cold for nearly 8 months without any significant developments. But then, in January 2020, while reviewing statements from those they'd initially questioned, detectives noticed a small but significant clue.
So you guys were home all night?
Yeah, we was in bed and air conditioning all.
It was Buckie's neighbors, Laura Martin and Robert Quinn, both of whom had initially told investigators they knew nothing about the murder. They insisted they were inside, and a noisy air conditioner kept them from hearing anything outside the day Buckie disappeared. Detectives also observed that, although their stories aligned, the way they delivered them lacked the same spontaneity.
It's like your vehicle pulling in, and if you step inside the house there and you can't hear it because we got an air conditioner going.
The focus on minute details and their repeated emphasis on the noise distraction raised suspicion against them. So detectives decided to interview them again, but this time they weren't at their home. Instead, they were already in custody at the Garrett County Detention Center on unrelated charges. So detectives went to the Garrett County Jail to question Robert.
I'm still working on figuring out all the circumstances with Buckie's disappearance and death. How well did you know him?
Really not very good.
Okay, and you didn't hear anything?
No, we had the air conditioner on.
Just like before, Robert stuck to his air conditioner story. But he had no idea his attempt to hide the truth was about to fall apart. After Robert, when detectives questioned Laura, she unknowingly contradicted her earlier claim by giving a completely different reason for not hearing anything that night.
Did you hear anything that night?
No, like I told you then, I had the washer and dryer running.
Okay.
Unlike her initial claim, she now said the noise from the washer and dryer kept her from hearing anything, which immediately exposed their lies. This revelation undoubtedly strengthened the detectives' suspicion of the couple. To further challenge their story, detectives spoke with the couple's neighbor, Janice Maxwell. Janice informed them that the couple had never owned an air conditioner. This made detectives certain that the pair was hiding something about their actions that night. When investigators took a closer look into their past, they found out that Laura and Robert were no strangers to the world of crime. Detectives also learned that from a very young age, Laura was raising 2 daughters on her own after separating from their father, and from 2002, she started engaging in crimes like burglary and abduction as a means of making a living. In October 2018, she met Robert through an ex-boyfriend, and the two quickly fell in love. In 2018, Robert moved into Laura's house on No. 4 Road, where she lived next to Buckie. Despite being neighbors, Laura and Robert had never been kind to him. The main source of their conflict was their dog, which often wandered onto Buckie's property, something he strongly disliked. This led to frequent arguments between them. However, to gather more leads in the case, detectives reached out to the Garrett County Jail authorities to obtain all of Laura's and Robert's jail calls. Detectives believe that if Laura and Robert had killed Buckie, they might have mentioned it in one of their jail calls. After reviewing all the call recordings, detectives found that Robert had made very few calls, while Laura's call list was extensive. Her call records revealed that, despite being in a relationship with Robert, Laura had been frequently calling her ex-boyfriend Mark from jail, and their conversations were sexually explicit. But unfortunately, despite reviewing the jail calls, detectives found no direct evidence connecting Laura or Robert to the murder. The only remaining way to prove their guilt was to obtain a confession, But detectives knew the couple wouldn't reveal the truth that easily. If they could manage to turn Laura against Robert, it might work in their favor. Accordingly, they came up with a plan, and on October 7th, 2020, sat down for another round of interrogation with Robert. This time, investigators already had a plan, but they were unaware of the dark secrets their strategy would soon lead them to. The detectives first put Robert at ease, and then revealed some harsh truths about Laura that he'd never known.
Do you know what her relationship is right now with her ex?
No.
Okay, probably not exactly what you think it is.
You know what I need? You for about 20 minutes. You know I'm hitting it one more time, right? Better be thinking when I get out. Alright, I love you, baby.
She's not faithful to you. You just heard it.
No.
Detectives played Laura's jail call with her ex-boyfriend, and as Robert processed the betrayal, his demeanor shifted. He started distancing himself from her, making a shocking claim that it was actually Laura who had killed Buckie that night. He went on to reveal what had motivated her to commit the crime.
I'm done bullshitting, man.
How much money did you hear about? Thousands, wasn't it?
Okay.
He claimed that the plan to rob Buckie was entirely Laura's idea. After hearing about Buckie's retirement, she assumed he might have a significant amount of money with him. He then provided a detailed account of how the murder was carried out.
Went sideways, didn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Why did it go sideways?
She went over Bucky's by herself, and she was staying there waiting for him to get to work. And whenever I come off his porch, she grabbed hold of him, tried to rob him, and he put up a fight.
Robert claimed he had no idea that Laura intended to commit murder. According to him, during the robbery, Laura suddenly turned violent and began physically attacking Buckie. When Robert came outside to intervene, Buckie was already unconscious. Unable to reverse what had happened, they loaded his body into the truck and drove to a remote local creek to dispose of it. On the way, Laura threw Buckie's phone out of the truck to prevent anyone from tracking their location. And after disposing of the body, Laura drove the truck back and set it on fire in an attempt to destroy all evidence. After the interrogation, detectives asked Robert to help them recreate the events by returning to the location where Buckie's body was disposed of. He agreed, and once there, he walked them through his version of what happened that night. And once Robert started to reenact the ominous events from that evil night, everyone was left in chills.
He sat right here on the ledge. All right.
She took his wallet.
She told him to get down on her knees and that.
Okay, can you kind of recreate what you saw her do?
She came up behind him, and she grabbed him by the hair of the head, and she kind of like stabbed him in the front of the neck and went around to the side. And he was on his knees probably like 2 or 3 minutes, and he fell over, and then she rolled him in the water. Well, he only had like $50. And I told her, I said it really wasn't worth the man's life. She said, well, you just shut up, or you'll be the next one to get.
Okay.
And I didn't say no more to her.
Detectives recorded the entire reenactment and then took Robert back to jail. He might have thought that he'd cleared himself by shifting all the blame onto Laura, but detectives were ready to turn his own account of the events against him, which would eventually turn Laura and Robert against each other.
It was supposed to be a burglary, and that's my idea. I'm not even gonna lie.
Okay.
But as far as killing him, no, that was not my idea at all. Like, I don't have it in my heart to hurt anybody, not like that.
After learning that Robert had shifted all the blame onto her, Laura opened up. She admitted that while the robbery had been her idea, the murder was not part of her plan. It was Robert's. On the night of May 28th, they waited outside Buckie's house, wearing masks and gloves, ready to carry out their robbery plan.
We had BB guns, but they looked like regular guns. It was a struggle with all three of us. I mean, I wasn't going to let him get the best of me.
She claimed that she'd tried to stop Robert, but he didn't listen, instead shouting at her to follow his instructions. Robert then took Buckie in the truck and drove to the creek where he performed the cruel act of killing.
Bobby pulled a box cutter out, and I'm like, what the f***? Then I saw Bobby cut him. I shoved Bobby, and I put my hands on Bucky's neck, and I'm looking at Bobby and I'm crying, and I'm like, please don't do this. And then Bobby's like, I'll You too. And like, there was a look in his eyes I ain't ever seen in my life, and it scared me. It really did.
She also claimed that she tried to save Bucky's life, but couldn't, as Robert threatened to kill her as well if she didn't comply with his orders. As both Robert and Laura pointed fingers at each other, detectives now faced the dilemma of determining who was lying and who was telling the truth. But one thing was certain, that they were both involved in the murder, and they were formally charged. However, the detectives still had to uncover the complete truth. In the end, it was surprisingly the inmates at Garrett County Jail who helped to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. Some of Laura's fellow inmates provided crucial details, stating that she'd admitted to killing Barlow during conversations with them. She'd also made a statement so disturbing that even the most hardened perpetrators would struggle to imagine it. Laura said she was fascinated by the feeling of Bucky's blood flowing through her fingers and craved the experience again. Without any hesitation, she and Robert ate the sandwich from Bucky's lunchbox, their hands still smeared with his blood after the murder. This revelation made it unmistakably clear that Laura was a twisted psychopath and the mastermind behind the gruesome act. Detectives also discovered that Laura had always been the dominant force in the relationship, manipulating Robert into becoming her accomplice in the crime. However, detectives offered them a plea deal, which they agreed to. They eventually confessed the startling truth that they'd been desperate for money because their electricity was about to be cut off, and they targeted Bucky for the robbery. But the brutal way he was killed only revealed a deep-seated anger within them. In court, both pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and first-degree robbery in connection with the killing, and were sentenced to life in prison.